The story of Downton Abbey is not just the tale of one family and their servants, but the story of a world on the edge of change. Behind the stone walls and elegant halls, time moves forward and traditions begin to tremble. Every great house has its rise, its glory, and its final bow, and for Downton Abbey, that moment is drawing near. This is where we begin to uncover the beginning of the end. Downton Abbey is more than a setting. It is almost a character in its own right. The estate stands as a symbol of wealth, power, and tradition. Its long corridors and grand dining halls echo with the voices of both the Crawley family and the servants who keep the household alive. At first glance, Downton seems timeless, untouched by the outside world. But change is always pressing at its doors. The drama of Downton Abbey lies in the constant struggle between holding on to the past and stepping into the future. The world outside the Abbey is moving quickly. In post-Edwardian England, the shadow of war has reshaped society. The rigid class system that once kept families like the Crawleys at the top is beginning to loosen. The servants, once expected to remain silent and loyal for life, are finding their own ambitions and voices. The younger generation of the Crawley family must also learn how to carry on the weight of tradition, while navigating a new world where titles and estates no longer guarantee survival. For the audience, this tension makes every scene at Downton meaningful. A simple dinner conversation becomes a reflection of larger questions. How much of tradition should be preserved? How much must be abandoned in order to survive? The Grand House is both a comfort and a prison, a place that shows the beauty of the old world, but also the limits of refusing change. As viewers, we are drawn not just to the beauty of the costumes and the elegance of the architecture, but to the emotional pull of a world in transition. We see Lady Mary, poised yet burdened, balancing her duty to Downton with her own desires. We watch the Dowager Countess deliver sharp remarks that remind us of the old order, even as it slips away. We hear the quiet dreams of the servants, who begin to see lives beyond the walls of the estate. This is why Downton Abbey became a global phenomenon. It is not only about aristocrats and maids. It is about people caught between yesterday and tomorrow. And in this podcast episode, as we step into the beginning of the end, we are invited to explore what happens when the old world can no longer hold back the tide of change. Every choice made by the Crawleys, every whisper in the servants' hall, and every shift in society brings us closer to the closing of a chapter that has defined an era. Time at Downton Abbey does not pass quietly. It leaves marks on the walls, the people and the traditions that once seemed unshakable. When we speak of the beginning of the end, we are not only talking about the conclusion of a story, but about the slow erosion of a way of life. The Crawley family lives under the constant awareness that their world is shifting beneath their feet. To keep Downton alive is not simply about money or status. It is about holding on to an identity that feels sacred. The estate itself becomes a living metaphor. Its grand size demands care, money, and devotion. But those resources are harder to secure as the years go on. The golden age of large country houses is fading. Fewer families can afford to live on such a scale, and fewer servants are willing to spend their lives in service. As modern jobs and opportunities appear, the once unshakable servant system begins to crumble. This forces the Crawleys to ask a painful question. How long can Downton stand against the current of time? This weight of time presses differently on each character. For Robert, the Earl of Grantham, the house is everything. He clings to tradition, convinced that Downton must remain unchanged, even if the world outside is unrecognizable. For Lady Mary, the burden is sharper. She understands that the house cannot survive without adapting, yet she also feels the crushing responsibility of being its guardian. Her choices are never only her own. They carry the future of Downton itself. Meanwhile, the older generation, represented so brilliantly by the Dowager Countess, watches with both pride and sorrow. Her sharp tongue often disguises the truth she knows too well. Even the grandest families must eventually bow to history. Every witty remark, every knowing look, is a reminder that she has seen the world change before, and she knows it will change again. For the servants, time feels both freeing and frightening. Some, like Carson, find comfort in the old order, where loyalty and routine define a life. Others, like Daisy or Anna, begin to wonder what else lies beyond the estate. They dream of independence, education, and lives of their own choosing. To them, the beginning of the end is not just about Downton's decline, but about the birth of new opportunities. This constant pull between old and new makes the story of Downton Abbey far more than a costume drama. It is a mirror held up to history. Every grand estate in England faced these same questions, and many fell when they failed to change. That is what makes watching Downton so powerful. It captures a moment when the world itself is shifting, and no amount of wealth or wit can hold it back. The beginning of the end is not just a plotline. It is an atmosphere, a slow tightening of the air around the house. We feel it in the way conversations carry hidden weight, in the way rooms that once seemed full of life now feel heavy with memory. It is the sense that we are walking through the final days of an era, even if the characters themselves are not ready to admit it. Every family reaches a moment when choices shape not only their future, but the legacy they will leave behind. For the Crawleys, that moment has arrived. Downton is no longer simply their home. It is their burden, their hope, and their battlefield. The beginning of the end forces each member of the family to face truths they would rather avoid, and the walls of the Abbey echo with questions that cannot be silenced. Lady Mary, with her sharp mind and quiet determination, feels the weight more than anyone. She has always understood that her role is not just personal, but symbolic. To her, every decision, whether about marriage, business, or the estate, becomes a matter of survival for Downton itself. She is torn between her own desires and her sense of duty, and this tension defines her path. For Mary, love cannot exist without responsibility, and freedom is always tangled with sacrifice. Robert, the Earl of Grantham, stands as a guardian of tradition, yet even he begins to see cracks in the old ways. His heart wants to protect Downton exactly as it has always been, but his mind cannot ignore the truth. The world no longer bends to the will of aristocrats. He struggles with pride, refusing to admit defeat, even as he feels the ground shifting beneath him. His love for his family and his house is unquestionable, but his ability to adapt may determine whether Downton survives or collapses. Cora, steady and graceful, becomes the quiet bridge between two worlds. Born an American, she never fully belonged to the rigid traditions of English aristocracy. Her outsider's view allows her to see change not only as a threat, but as a chance to rebuild. She guides her husband with gentle firmness, reminding him that love and loyalty can preserve what tradition alone cannot. Then there is the Dowager Countess, whose presence looms over every decision. Her words are often wrapped in wit, but behind them lies a sharp understanding of reality. She knows that endings are inevitable, yet she insists that dignity must never be lost. For her, the true test of the Crawleys will not be whether they can stop change, but whether they can face it with grace. The younger generation watches closely too. Sibby, George, and Marigold may be children, but they represent the future, one that will inherit whatever remains after the choices of today. Their presence is a constant reminder that the story of Downton is not just about the present family, but about those who will live with the consequences. Inside these walls, love, pride, and duty clash daily. Every dinner, every argument, every whispered conversation in the halls feels heavier than before. The Crawleys know they cannot escape the march of time, but they still believe they can shape how their story will end. The question that lingers is whether unity will carry them through, or whether the weight of their own differences will hasten the end of their world. Beneath the grand dining room, behind the polished silver and glowing chandeliers, another world beats with its own rhythm. The servants' hall is the heart that keeps Downton alive, and yet it is also where the greatest tremors of change are felt. For centuries, families like the Crawleys relied on loyalty below stairs to keep life above stairs untouched. But as the world outside begins to offer new chances, the voices once content to remain hidden are beginning to rise. Mr. Carson, the butler, embodies devotion to tradition. To him, Downton is sacred, and service is not just work, but purpose. He believes that every servant has a duty to preserve the dignity of the house, no matter how the world shifts. His steady hand and stern words are meant to hold back the tide of change, but even Carson cannot ignore the emptying chairs at the servants' table, the younger men and women leaving for jobs that promise independence. His loyalty becomes both his strength and his weakness, blinding him to the reality that time does not honor devotion. Mrs. Hughes, with her quiet wisdom, sees things differently. She understands that service is not a destiny but a choice, and choices are multiplying. She watches the younger servants dream of lives beyond Downton, and does not scold them for it. Instead, she offers guidance, urging them to be brave but careful, to step into new futures without forgetting the lessons of loyalty and care. She becomes a voice of compassion, bridging the fading world of tradition with the rising world of opportunity. Among the younger staff, ambition begins to bloom. Daisy, once shy and uncertain, now hungers for education and independence. Her desire to learn becomes a spark of rebellion, a refusal to be defined only by her role in the kitchen. For her, the beginning of the end at Downton is not a tragedy, but a chance to become something more. Even in the shadows, Thomas Barrows struggles with his own place in this changing world. His sharpness and ambition often make him an outsider, yet he too is shaped by the crumbling of old systems. In a world where service is no longer a guaranteed life, he must confront his fears of loneliness and find where he belongs. The servants' hall reflects society in motion. Every laugh, every quarrel, every shared meal speaks of lives balancing on the edge of change. To remain at Downton means holding on to safety and identity. To leave means risking uncertainty but reaching for freedom. Unlike the family upstairs who fight to preserve their heritage, the servants below measure their choices in personal stakes. A chance at love, at education, at dignity. In many ways, the end of Downton Abbey belongs as much to the servants as it does to the Crawleys. Their voices remind us that history is not only written by the powerful, but by those who quietly, faithfully, and often invisibly carried the weight of the old world. As the Abbey begins its slow farewell, their stories rise, shaping not just the future of the estate, but the meaning of what it means to belong. Every ending is written long before the final page turns. For the creators of Downton Abbey, the challenge was not simply to tell another chapter, but to prepare the audience for goodbye. From the moment the story entered its later seasons, small choices were planted like threads, weaving together a picture of closure. Behind every line of dialogue and every sweeping shot of the Abbey, the writers and producers asked a single question: how do you end something beloved without breaking the heart of those who love it? Julian Fellowes, the mind behind the series, approached this task with care. He knew that Downton was never just about the Crawleys or their servants. It was about a world, a culture, and a way of life. That meant the ending could not arrive with sudden shock. It had to grow slowly, layer by layer, like the fading of light at dusk. This is why the later episodes carry an unspoken heaviness. Laughter still fills the halls, love still blossoms, but beneath it all runs the knowledge that nothing lasts forever. The creative team used atmosphere as much as plot. The music, once playful and light, grew softer, carrying notes of nostalgia. The camera lingered longer on empty rooms, on corridors that seemed wider, on gardens that felt quieter. These subtle touches reminded the audience that time was moving forward, that the Abbey itself was aging along with its people. Even the dialogue carried this weight. Characters began to speak less about the immediate problems of the house and more about the future, of children, of careers, of life beyond Downton. Jokes from the Dowager Countess still cut sharply, but even her words hinted at the wisdom of letting go. Through her, the writers gave voice to the truth no one else dared say aloud: that endings are not to be feared but faced with dignity. The cast played their roles with this understanding, balancing joy and sorrow. Each actor carried the knowledge that they were not only closing a chapter for their characters, but for millions of fans. Their performances were layered with gratitude, as if every smile and every tear was a gift to the audience who had followed them for years. What makes this ending so powerful is not only that it brings closure, but that it reflects life itself. Endings are rarely neat or sudden. They arrive slowly, through small changes, through decisions that at first seem ordinary but later prove final. The creative team of Downton Abbey captured this truth, ensuring that the farewell was not simply an event, but a journey. By the time the final notes of the story play, the audience is not surprised. They have been guided here with care, prepared to say goodbye, yet still moved by the beauty of the last moments. That is the art of crafting a farewell. Not to deny the sadness of the end, but to transform it into something unforgettable. Some stories are watched, others are lived. Downton Abbey became one of those rare tales that did more than entertain. It became part of the culture itself. From the moment the first episode aired, audiences across the world were drawn not only into the Crawley family's struggles, but into the heartbeat of a disappearing world. The show crossed oceans, crossed languages, and brought together people who might never have stepped inside a country estate, yet felt as if they belonged within its walls. Part of this cultural pull came from timing. When Downton Abbey arrived, audiences were hungry for a story that felt grand, yet intimate. In an era of fast-moving television and modern settings, here was a show that dared to slow down, to focus on conversations over dinners, whispered secrets in hallways, and the tension between loyalty and change. It reminded viewers of a time when life moved with formality, but also when the cracks of progress could be felt in every direction. But its impact went far beyond nostalgia. The series sparked new interest in history, fashion, and class. Museums reported increased visitors curious about Edwardian and post-Edwardian England. Costume designers found themselves fielding requests inspired by Lady Mary's elegance or Sybil's daring choices. Discussions about class systems, women's roles, and the effects of war were suddenly alive in living rooms, classrooms, and social debates. What might have seemed like a simple period drama instead became a platform for conversations about identity, tradition, and progress. The reach of Downton Abbey extended into modern culture in surprising ways. It inspired parodies, skits, and references across comedy shows. It influenced other dramas to pursue period storytelling with more courage, showing that audiences were not only willing but eager to commit to layered stories set against history. Merchandising, tours of filming locations, and even themed events began appearing, proof that Downton had crossed from television into everyday life. For fans, the show was not only about watching characters, they saw themselves in those characters. Viewers who came from working-class families connected to the servants' quiet endurance and their hunger for better lives. Others connected to the Crawleys' struggle to preserve what felt precious while adapting to change. It was a story that mirrored the very real human fear of losing the worlds we build, whether those worlds are grand estates or simply the homes we hold dear. And so, the cultural impact of Downton Abbey cannot be measured only by ratings or awards. Its true legacy is the way it stirred emotion across generations. Grandparents and grandchildren watched together, finding common ground in its themes. Strangers bonded over their favorite characters. Teachers used it as a lens for history. Fashion designers and filmmakers borrowed its elegance. It became not only a show but a shared memory, a piece of storytelling that will live long after the final curtain falls. Downton Abbey's power was never just in its story. It was in the way it reminded audiences worldwide that endings come for every age, every family, every tradition. Yet even in endings, beauty can endure. Every story, no matter how grand, must face its final act. For Downton Abbey, the beginning of the end was not only about closing the lives of its characters, but about asking us, the audience, to reflect on why we followed them in the first place. From the first opening note of the theme music, we were invited into a world of elegance, loyalty, heartbreak, and hope. To watch Downton end is to realize that we have also traveled with it, carrying its lessons into our own lives. The closing of Downton is more than the fall of a house. It is the natural passage of time itself. We see it in Robert's quiet acceptance that even traditions must bend. We see it in Mary's courage to hold responsibility in one hand and change in the other. We hear it in the Dowager Countess's parting wisdom. Words that remind us that endings are not failures, but milestones. And we feel it in the servants' journeys. Each step forward a reminder that life does not pause, even when walls as old as Downton's begin to fade. But what makes this ending so powerful is not its sadness, it is its humanity. The story teaches us that every life, every family, and every tradition eventually reaches a moment when it must let go. The Crawley's farewell becomes our mirror. We are reminded that even as one chapter closes, another waits to be written. This is why Downton resonates beyond its final bow. It speaks to the universal truth that beauty can exist even in goodbye. The legacy of Downton Abbey is not locked in its stone walls or its elegant costumes. It lives on in the way audiences around the world carry its themes into their own stories. It is in the courage to adapt when change feels unbearable. It is in the grace of holding on to dignity even when the past slips away. And it is in the reminder that while every era must end, the memories we gather remain.